So welcome, Maurice Hirsch, and welcome all the participants, and thank you for devoting your time to meet us. It's such an honor and pleasure to have you with us. I hope you could see all the participants, which is a tiny group of the real amount of Friends of Israel in Finland. There are about 20 pro-Israel NGOs in Finland which are working together and tirelessly to confront the lies, misconceptions, and disinformation spread about Israel. But unfortunately, there are also many influential people in Finland who act without knowing what they are doing. In addition to them, there are certainly also those anti-Israel actors who deliberately distort events and international agreements in the case of Israel. So I will start by reading you an extract from a letter published yesterday by the Archbishop of the Lutheran Church in Finland and another bishop and the head of the Church Foreign Aid. Quote, "Our late President Martti Ahtisaari said, 'Peace is a matter of will. The international community must focus on supporting this will in the parties of the conflict. The first step towards peace is a ceasefire. A ceasefire is also urgently needed so that humanitarian aid can be delivered and civilians can be protected.'" So this end of quote. So many Finns who follow the news from Gaza and see the ruins and hear about the plight of civilians also feel that an immediate ceasefire would be the most important thing to achieve now. So why doesn't Israel want an immediate ceasefire? Why could it even be seen as harmful to genuine peace?
It's unbelievable. Firstly, thank you for having me, and I hope that I'll be able to share some of the insights of what's actually happening here on the ground. To answer your question, the reason that Israel cannot and should not tolerate a ceasefire at the moment is the fact that as much as Israel would like peace, and Israel has been really trying to reach peace with our Palestinian neighbors now for a very, very long time, the reality is that our neighbors simply don't want peace. Hamas is not interested in peace. Hamas's charter clearly says that its goal is to destroy Israel. It isn't interested in peace. It isn't interested in the better interests of the Palestinian people. Its goal is to destroy Israel. Now, that's something which hasn't changed in the last 30 years. This is something which Hamas clearly says to the world, and the world should really start believing it. What about Hamas, forcing Hamas, the genocidal terrorists who murdered 1,200 people, have fired 10,000 rockets indiscriminately targeting Israel's civilian population, have taken the Gazan people hostage? They are the ones responsible for the destruction in Gaza because they planted their terrorist infrastructure in the houses of Gazans, in the schools of the Gazan people, in the hospitals of the Gazan people. They've abused international law. They've breached international law. Obviously, Israel is not interested in harming the civilian population of Gaza, but we can no longer tolerate a situation in which there is a genocidal terrorist organization that openly calls for the destruction of Israel, and that not only calls for the destruction of Israel, but is actually taking steps to annihilate Israel on our border. It's not a question of, well, they want to destroy all of Israel and murder all of the Jews. This isn't a negotiation. Okay, so we'll let them destroy half of Israel and only murder half of the Jews. That's not something which is an option.
By the way, what's the difference between ceasefire and humanitarian pause?
As we saw just a few days ago, I don't know how many of the Finnish viewers saw, Israel opened a humanitarian window for the civilian population in Gaza City to flee southwards to get away from the fighting. On the first day, a handful of Gazans left. They were immediately targeted by the Hamas terrorists, who was literally killed them, trying to persuade them to stay in Gaza City and to continue acting as human shields. The next day, Israel literally placed tanks alongside that road, the Salah ad-Din road, and allowed for the Gazan population, innocent population, to move south under the auspices of Israel, who protected them against the terrorists. And then the next day, we saw 10,000 people. The third day, we saw suddenly 50,000 people moving along on this corridor provided by Israel, secured by Israel, in order to move the civilian population away. This helps both our war effort and helps protect the civilians. Had we had really these malicious thoughts that everyone is trying to impose upon us, we could have simply massacred all of those Palestinians. Tens of thousands of people walking along the streets, we could have simply annihilated them. We didn't, because that isn't our goal. Our goal is to target the terrorists, and the civilians, to the extent possible, can leave.
What is actually the situation of the kidnapped right now? Is there any more knowledge, or anyone else freed or anything?
There were some 240 people taken hostage by the terrorists, pregnant women, the elderly, over 75, babies, little Kfir Bibas, who was just 9 months old when he was taken hostage by the terrorists. There was a woman who was clearly past her due date whilst in captivity. We don't know what happened to her, whether she's still alive, whether she gave birth in captivity. There have been a number of cases where we found the bodies of Israelis who we believe to be kidnapped in Gaza. Just a few days ago, we found a body of one of those kidnapped people in the vicinity of the Al-Shifa hospital, clearly indicating that the hostages were taken into the hospital on their way to further destinations. And some of the hostages are being held by the PFLP as well, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. This is an organization which is part of the PLO, the organization that ostensibly made peace with Israel. But now we have a member organization participating in the massacre and taking hostages. They are using these hostages cynically in order to not only attack Israel physically and murder Israelis, but also to use the hostages and the uncertainty as to what's going on as a means of psychological warfare also against Israel. Their goal is to use and abuse the hostages. Most likely, many of them have also been possibly killed in order to secure a picture of victory.
I will read another extract of their letter. This is a quote. In its counterattack, Israel has launched the extensive bombing of Gaza, which has already claimed more than 11,000 lives. More than 4,500 of the civilian victims are children. More than 1.5 million people have been forced to flee their homes and are desperately seeking shelter in UN facilities, hospitals, schools, mosques, churches, and other civilian buildings. However, there are no safe places for civilians in the area due to Israeli attacks. End of quote. And then they add, this is another quote, compliance with international humanitarian law must be demanded from both parties. End of quote. So does Israel violate the international humanitarian law in Gaza?
So let's unpack a few of those statements with your permission. Firstly, numbers. The numbers of casualties coming out of Gaza are only coming from the Gaza Ministry of Health. That means Hamas. It is a branch of Hamas. It is part of Hamas. It is part of that terror propaganda mechanism that controls the Gaza Strip. When you see reports even coming from the Palestinian Authority, all they do is parrot and mimic the statistics coming out from the Gaza Ministry of Health. The Palestinian Authority hasn't been present in the Gaza Strip since 2007. So really, they're just whitewashing the terrorist propaganda numbers that cannot be verified in any way, shape, or form in order to provide this ostensible claim of the number of victims. Now, for those of you that have followed the number of victims, you saw, for example, the massive jump in the numbers when Israel allegedly attacked the El Ahli hospital in the Gaza Strip. As we all know, the numbers jumped up by 500 dead people. In hindsight, we know two very, very clear facts. One, it wasn't Israel who attacked the El Hali's hospital. It was an errant rocket fired by the terrorists in Gaza. Number two, there were no more than 24 people killed in that attack and not 500. The numbers were never readjusted in any way, shape, or form. So that's the first number. Don't believe any of those numbers. Secondly, if you look at those numbers very carefully, you will always see that the number of civilians, specifically children, is a constant all the way through. 41% of the victims, without much leeway, 41% always over the entire course of the fighting, are children, which is an incredible figure. It doesn't go up, it doesn't go down. Statistically, this is impossible. But when you don't have to provide any cover for the numbers that you're giving, you can give out any numbers and anyone will then believe them. Number three, how many of those killed are terrorists? The statistics put out by the Gaza Ministry of Health don't associate anyone as being a terrorist. Now, we know that 1,500 terrorists were killed in Israel on the day of the attack. We know that the Israeli forces in and operating in the Gaza Strip, just on the ground, have killed at least 3,500 terrorists. So we have 5,000 people, terrorists at least, killed as part of the Israeli ground operations and on the day of the attack. Add to that the terrorists killed during the bombings, the initial bombings of the Israeli Air Force, and we suddenly have an entirely different picture of the terrorists, of the people killed. Some 6,000 to 7,000 of them are actually terrorists. So obviously this doesn't go with the numbers that Hamas is providing, but Hamas doesn't need to stick to any standard of truth. Everyone just buys their lies blindly as a means to attack Israel. So that's not really an answer. So that's the numbers game. On the subject of the attacks in Gaza, it is true there have been wide-scale attacks in Gaza, but as everyone knows, and it's really been quite extensively documented, not even only by Israel, but by some of the humanitarian organizations as well. And we've seen this playing out every time there's been previous cycles, as we call them, of violence. The Hamas terrorists have embedded themselves within the civilian population, in the urban population, under schools, by schools, in mosques, under mosques, over mosques, on hospitals, in hospitals, under hospitals, wherever possible. As Musa Abu Marzouk, one of the Hamas leaders, said the other day, he was asked on Russian television, well, you've dug 500 kilometers of tunnels under the Gaza Strip. Why don't you let the civilian population hide there from the Israeli bombings? He looked the interviewer straight in the eye and said, the tunnels are there to protect us, Hamas, the forces fighting. 75% of the Gaza Strip are refugees, so they're the problem of the international community. They don't care about the civilians. They could provide them with more safety. They are relying on archbishops in Finland to come to their rescue because they just don't care about them. They couldn't give a damn about the Gazan civilians. The goal is to just attack Israel and use them and abuse them as a means, as cannon fodder, literally as cannon fodder. And that is the sad reality. So yes, of course, there is wide-scale destruction. Israel is not interested in that. But when terrorists hide bombs, as we saw pictures coming out just the other day, hiding missiles in underneath the beds of children in houses, that's the pictures that you don't see. Yeah, that's how the terrorists operate. And so you're seeing wide-scale destruction because that's where the terrorists are hiding.
There is the idea that Israel is using excessive force, or disproportional force, which is you can quite often hear this kind of claim.
The definition of proportionality, everyone uses this word, disproportionate force and proportionality. Most people use it. I don't think they know what it means. So let's just provide an explanation. in international humanitarian law, the laws of war, proportionality says like this. It's based on an individual attack, and it says that the incidental damage caused should not be excessive to the concrete military advantage perceived by the reasonable military commander. What does that mean? If I see a house which is filled with rockets, and next to the house there are 3 people who are not involved in the fighting, it's still a legitimate target to attack those missiles, even if civilians might be killed. In war, civilians are killed. It's unfortunate. But again, you need to be able to weigh the concrete military advantage to the incidental civilian damage. And so without knowing exactly what the target was, if Israel attacks now a mosque, let's say they're attacking a mosque. Well, how can you attack a mosque? Obviously, that's an important question. But if we show you that in the mosque there were rocket launchers and rockets, then suddenly there's no question. And so that is what is happening all the time. Israel is attacking the military targets, and which are unfortunately in these civilian installations. But the world is only seeing, well, Israel attacked a mosque. There has to be a little bit more credit given to Israel, whether these people like it or not. Israel is respecting the laws of war. That is what we are doing. And secondly, even if we were talking about real proportionality on the simplest level, what is proportionate to firing 10,000 rockets? If we were to fire 10,000 rockets at Paris, for example, how do we think the Parisians and the French would respond? What would be a proportionate attack? When we're talking about the 9/11 attack in the United States, a bunch of terrorists attack a target in America, 3,500 people murdered. The Allies then go to war in Iraq and Afghanistan. In Iraq, according to leaked US Army documents, in the first 6 years, from 2004 to 2009, including, there were 110,000 people killed, of whom 66,000 were civilians. So when we're talking about proportionality, it isn't, well, they killed 1,400 people, we can kill 1,400 people and it's all over. 3,500 people killed in America and 110,000 people killed in Iraq. And it isn't because the Americans were committing war crimes. It's because proportionality isn't one victim here and one victim there, one rocket here, one rocket there. That's just not international humanitarian law. That's not the laws of war.
Is Israel's goal of destroying Hamas's power and strike capability a legitimate goal? Does Israel have the right to pursue this as self-defense?
I think that goes without saying that Israel is entitled to defend itself and its civilians, and not only entitled, has a positive duty to defend the Israeli civilians against a genocidal terrorist organization that not only has the desire to destroy Israel and to murder Jews, but has actually acted very violently upon that, beheading babies, raping women, pillaging, murdering, taking hostages. I think it's very clear that Israel is entitled to do all that it is in its capability to really to save humanity from these genocidal terrorists.
What does actually the military necessity and distinction between civilian and military targets mean in IHL?
Necessity requires that Israel attack only military targets. These can be things that by their nature, their purpose, or their use are part of that military infrastructure of the enemy. So obviously rocket launchers would be clearly by their purpose, they're a military target. By their use, all types of installations that are being used in order to attack. So that's the military necessity. Distinction, on the other hand, is that Israel is required, and it does so to the greatest extent possible, to differentiate between the military targets, the military personnel, and the civilians. that's something which we are doing really to the greatest extent possible. And it is unfortunate that there are civilian casualties, but the casualties are caused because the terrorists are using these people as human shields, and not because Israel is failing in its ability or in its desire to implement international law. Distinction does not say that you cannot kill civilians or that civilians should never be harmed. That isn't the case. That isn't what international law says. In fact, international law says the opposite, that there is a recognition that there are instances in which it is legitimate even for civilians to be killed as part of the war effort.
Some activists, especially the very radical ones on campuses, make even more severe accusations of war crimes using the terms genocide and ethnic cleansing. I assume these terms have a clear definition in international law. So how are they defined, and what do you think about their suitability to describe the situation now in Gaza?
So the crime of genocide is definitely defined in international law. It has been since the period of the Nuremberg trials following the Second World War. It's also defined in the document, really the contract, the convention of the International Criminal Court, and it's very clear you're trying to destroy a race or a group of people as part of that race. Genocide in general, in normal terms, when you're talking about a crime of genocide, you are taking a population that was, let's just give it numbers for sake of clarity. You're taking a group of people that was 100 people. After the genocide, there are now 10 people left because the other side tried to murder or did murder 90% of the other population. That's what we saw in the Second World War. The Jewish population of Europe was some 8.5 million people. They were mapped around the world. You have the famous Conference of Wannsee, where the Germans tried to come up and say, well, how many Jews are present in every place? And then they subsequently and really systematically murdered 6 million Jews. The number of Jews that are alive in the world today is still less than the number of Jews at the start of the Holocaust almost 75 years ago. The Palestinian population, on the other hand, according to the statistics provided by the Palestinian Authority Central Bureau of Statistics, over the last 75 years has grown incredibly. Under the period of time under Israel's control of the Gaza Strip from 1967 to 1994, the population grew at really astounding sizes. And in the last 20 years, whilst under the rule of Hamas, the population has continued to grow and grow and grow and grow. So the ludicrousy of the argument that Israel is committing a genocide is that this would be in the same way as Palestine is the only country in the world that didn't exist until it was occupied. This would be the only instance in the world where genocide actually resulted in a growth of the Palestinian population. It's a claim that just has no veracity whatsoever. It has no factual basis, but you can throw it around because it's there to vilify Israel rather than any factual basis. And for those that it's important that the viewers understand, you can go on and look for the Palestinian Authority Central Bureau of Statistics. They have a category there of population estimates, and you can see the massive growth of the Palestinian population under Israel over the last 70 years. So to claim there's a genocide is just baseless and ridiculous.
This is another quote from the bishop's letter. Quote, "For Palestinians, the bombing of Gaza is a continuation of decades of occupation, violence, and displacement. Lasting peace can only be achieved with a just solution that takes into account all parties to the conflict and guarantees the realization of the human rights of all living in the region. So would you like to comment these ideas about the lasting peace and the reasons behind the conflict?
We can all sign up to empty platitudes of, well, let's all look for world peace. I think we all joke about all types of beauty contests where the participants say, well, I'm looking to create world peace. These are obviously something which the Jewish people, as a country, we strive for peace with our neighbors. Unfortunately, our neighbors simply aren't interested in peace with Israel. Israel has, for the last 30 years, offered time and time again ever-growing offers to placate the terrorists, to try and buy the terrorists off. Just the Oslo Accords to start with, again in the Camp David peace talks in May, June 2000, which President Clinton said were scuttled by the intransigence of Yasser Arafat, again in 2008, where Mahmoud Abbas was offered by then Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert more land than the Palestinians have ever controlled in the past, more land than even the Gaza Strip and Judea and Samaria put together, as even not Israel said. That was the story that was told by Saib Arikat on Palestinian television, and that he had recommended taking the offer, but again the Palestinians rejected that offer as well. It's unfortunate and it's a harsh reality, but the Palestinians simply aren't interested in peace with Israel. The Palestinian Authority was meant to be the embodiment of creating peace, of establishing peace, but really all they've done is taught the Palestinians and generations upon generations of Palestinians to hate, kill, and be killed. And so you have the situation where you have to understand 3,000 people don't get up in one morning and say, you know what, we're going to go out and slaughter Jews. That isn't something that happens overnight. This has been a process of indoctrination, of brainwashing, of education to hate that has been going on for 30 years. If you read the curriculum of the Palestinian Authority, it's become more and more hate-filled over the years, even though it's funded by the international community. The international community is literally paying the Palestinian Authority to teach Palestinian children to hate and kill Jews. That is the unfortunate reality. So Israel, there isn't much more that Israel could do. We aren't willing to surrender. We aren't willing to go happily walking into the gas chambers ever again. Never again means never again. But unfortunately, the Palestinians are set in their goal of destroying Israel. If you follow, I used to work at an organization called Palestinian Media Watch. Just listen to what the Palestinians say. They say every day, our goal is to destroy Israel. Our goal is to re-establish Palestine, which never existed. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That's the chant. That goal is homicidal in its nature, in that Palestine, which never existed, will now encompass the whole area. There's no space for Israel. And the Jews who live there will be annihilated. Yes. This is something which is taught every single day in the Palestinian schools. It's prevalent in every walk of life. And so whilst they can call for, the bishops unfortunately have no understanding really of what they're saying. They're calling for Israel, who respects international law, to respect international law, which they say we're breaching. But really, what influence do they have on these terrorist organizations? Well, these people who beheaded babies, raped women, murdered elderly and disabled and sick people, and are now holding 240 hostages. Well, we really think you should uphold international humanitarian law and seek peace. Yes. They have no respect for your points of view. They have no respect for what you're trying to preach or to teach. If they could, here's the bad news, they would murder you as well. And it doesn't matter how much you try and appease them. This is their homicidal, genocidal ideology. Go and tell them to respect international humanitarian law. It's really, if it wasn't so pathetic, it would almost be funny.
Many people do not understand that Israel actually is fighting like in the front line, like the civilized world against the barbarism. So that's a sad thing that so many.
And these terrorists are looking on. They're looking to see how the world responds.
Yeah.
If they see that the world responds in a manner which shows weakness, which forces Israel to again suffer a massacre that we haven't seen the likes of which since the Holocaust, and then allow these homicidal terrorists to continue on, the result will be that the terrorists will understand that the West is lost, that they can do this in every single country and then play the victim card, and they will be let off. That is how the West will be lost.
Yeah, people do not understand that actually there are lots of terrorist cells in Europe, and there are people who are calling for intifada in Europe. So it's sad reality that people kind of take for granted that we have this kind of peaceful environment to raise our children here, while Israel is fighting this war.